There is the common notion among the general public that even artists can't draw hands. And they're absolutely right. It's one of those things where you try to draw it and it looks a little awkward, so you erase it again and correct it over and over and over, and it still doesn't look right, but you can't quite figure out how to fix it. So it sits there like some sort of limp meat spider and you accept defeat. But no longer, because today we're going to break down how to draw hands from scratch in your own style. We'll be going over hand anatomy, some helpful drawing methods, tips, stylization techniques, and of course, examples. For hand anatomy, let's start off with the bone structure. Hand bones are long and thin and can be divided into 5 main sections: the wrist, the bones which make up the palm, the first finger bones which are the longest, the second finger bones which are slightly shorter, and the fingertip bones which are the shortest. Notice how each finger is made of 3 bones, except for the thumb, which is only 2 bones. Next, let's take a look at the hand's muscle structure. This is the hand face down. Anatomical diagrams can be confusing, so it can help to break down the diagram into its major parts. Here, I picked out the most prominent muscle shapes. This is the hand face up. I did the same thing here and picked out the most prominent muscle shapes. For me personally, when it comes to hands, I think the most important muscles to keep in mind are these 2. They're the most visible from the outside, and it's good to know where they are when drawing various hand poses. Alright, now that we have a basic understanding of hand anatomy, let's learn some different methods that can help us draw the form of the hand. The first, and in my opinion, the most important method I want to show you is called the shape method. This method is simply building a hand out of simple shapes. In order to figure out what shapes to use, let's look at some references. Here I have pictures of 2 hands, one face up and one face down. The first thing I can see is that the palm is a sort of square trapezoid shape, and like we learned before, the fingers can be divided into 3 rectangular sections, except for the thumb, which can be divided into 2. For the hand face down, we can see that there are 4 small bumps for the knuckles, and 5 bones that kind of jut out from the outside. So for the back of the hand, it can be broken down into these general shapes. Now for the hand face up, let's divide the palm into more shapes. I noticed that when I made a cup shape with my hands, my palm divided into these 3 major sections. There is also this M-shaped wrinkle on top. So when drawing, I like to build my palms out of these 4 main shapes: the top section, the thumb connector part, the side, and the M-shaped wrinkle. So overall, the hand face up can be broken down into these general shapes. Now let's examine the shape method when it comes to drawing fists from several angles. For fists, I like to divide them into wrist, trapezoid, thumb, curled fingers with wrinkle, and knuckles. Now, this simplified fist looks much easier to draw. Let's try this again on several more fists. For a fist face up, we can divide it into the same shapes as before: the wrist, the trapezoid, the curled fingers with wrinkle, the thumb, and for this one, the palm is showing, so we can divide it into the thumb connector part and the side part, which gives you a simplified fist like this. For a fist from the back, we can divide it again into the wrist, the trapezoid, the curled fingers, the thumb, and the knuckles, resulting in a simplified fist like this. And finally, for a fist punching forward, we can break it down into a trapezoid in perspective, the curled fingers with wrinkle, the thumb, and the knuckles. Hopefully, these simplified templates can make drawing fists a little more manageable. Alright, so now let's try a quick example of drawing a hand using the shape method based off of a reference photo. This pose is a little odd, so let's use the shape method to break it down. On the reference photo, I mapped out the general trapezoid/pentagonal shape of the palm overall, and then divided it into those 3 main sections. Then, I copied down those shapes to start building my own palm. For the fingers, I started marking where I observed the thumb and pinky would come out from, and then built the fingers out of those 3 blocks, and the thumb out of 2 blocks, following along with the way the fingers are bent in the reference photo. I then outlined this rough sketch, guesstimated where the M-shaped wrinkle would be from this perspective, and added nails. Now let's try another example using the shape method, but this time without a reference photo. This is for when you can't find the hand pose you want on Google Images, so you kinda have to make it up yourself. For this one, I started off with a very quick sketch of the pose I want, then from there, mapped out the trapezoid shape of the palms. Then I divided the palms into those 3 main sections and mapped out where I estimated the knuckles would be. Then I built each finger out of those 3 blocks and outlined the sketch. The thumb on the right side looked odd, so I kept readjusting it, and after adding light bumps for the knuckles on the left, the entire left hand looked weird, so I cut it and made it shorter, enlarged it a bit, and made sure the middle knuckle was the tallest. Okay, now that we've explored the shape method, let's move on to one of my favorite methods, the Mitten Method. Notice how the hand can be divided into wrist, palm, thumb, and fingers? This creates a mitten shape. The Mitten Method is drawing a mitten to map out the general shape of the hand and then adding details afterward. Let's try it out. I'll start off with a very basic mitten shape. Then I'll divide the mitten into all 4 fingers and add light bumps and lines for the knuckles and bones. After outlining this sketch, I have a completed hand. Notice how the mitten sketch guided me, so I didn't draw the fingers too long or too short. For this next one, let's try using the Mitten Method with a fist. I'll start off with a simple mitten fist and then divide it into fingers. After outlining the sketch and adding slight details, I have a completed fist. For our last example, I mapped out a mitten shape, but with the pinky separated, because I wanted it to be gracefully bent in front of the other fingers. I then divided it into the remaining 3 fingers, and finally outlined the sketch and added light details, including the M-shaped wrinkle. But what if you want to draw hands in perspective? For that, I would recommend using the spiral method. The spiral method involves using coils to build the hand. This one is pretty tricky, so let's start with a demo. I found a reference picture that kind of looks like the perspective I want, and then started off by drawing a trapezoid in perspective for the palm, and then adding the wrist at the bottom. Then I used coils to map out the fingers. I started with using a circle for the knuckle, and then started building coils on top to make out the shape of a finger coming towards the viewer. Notice how the coils help with foreshortening, and that the finger curves upward due to perspective. I did the same process for the ring finger in red, and then the remaining fingers, making sure that the middle finger is the longest. Think of it kind of like drawing slinkies. I then mapped out the top section of the palm and added the thumb, making it especially small due to perspective. I outlined the rough sketch, and notice how when dividing the fingers into sections, I made the fingertips longer than the other blocks. This is to follow foreshortening, creating the illusion that the fingertips are closer to us than the rest of the hand. I did some adjustments to make the fingertips even longer, and then outlined this second sketch to clean it up. And there we go. For the second example, I picked out another reference picture, and now we're going to replicate this pose using the spiral method. Once again, I started with the trapezoid in perspective and the wrist, and then added the knuckles to map out the base of the fingers. Same as before, I draw coils to build the shape of the fingers in perspective, and later adjusted it to make the fingertips longer. I then roughly outlined the sketch, adjusting the pinky angle along the way. After these adjustments, I started a final outline and added some light wrinkles on the palm, guesstimating what the M-shaped wrinkle would look like from this angle. For our last example, I'm going to be doing a pointing pose in perspective. I made sure to grab a reference picture and started off with a circle for the top of the palm, then added circles for knuckles and quickly sketched out 4 fingers, using the reference photo as a guide. I then used the spiral method to draw the thumb and pointer finger in perspective. After adding coils on the other fingers for depth, I then outlined this rough sketch, adding light wrinkles based on the reference photo. And there we go. The last method I want to share is what I call circles and sticks. I used this method when I first started drawing hands, and it's basically just using circles and sticks to help you structure your fingers. We'll start off with an open hand. I drew a quick trapezoid for the palm and drew 5 stick fingers, then added circles where the joints are supposed to be. I then filled out the fingers and did a final outline on top, adding some light wrinkles on the palm. Simple, right? For our next demo, let's try a hand from a slight side angle. I started off with a thinner rectangle for that side view palm and drew stick fingers in the pose I wanted. Then I added ball joints in the knuckles and fingers. After filling out the fingers, I outlined the sketch and added light lines for the bones on top of the hand. Now for our last example, let's draw the classic peace sign. Once again, we start off with a trapezoid for the palm, thin rectangle for the wrist, and stick fingers with ball joints to map out the pose. I then filled out the fingers and sectioned out the palm based on the shape method, and did a final outline, making sure to add those palm wrinkles. Now that we've gone over some helpful methods, let's move on to some quick tips for drawing hands. Tip number 1. For proportions, each hand is about 3/4 the length of the face. This is a good guideline to make sure your hands aren't too big or too small, unless it's intentional. Tip number 2. The middle finger is always the longest. Make sure your fingers aren't all the same length. Tip number 3. For proportions, the middle finger is almost the same length as the palm, just slightly shorter. This is a good guideline to make sure your fingers aren't too short, unless it's intentional. And finally, tip number 4. Ring and pointer fingers are around the same length, and the thumb and pinky are almost the same length, with the thumb being only slightly shorter. Keeping these finger lengths proportional is key to making more realistic hands. If you're wondering why your hands are looking weird, it's probably because you're missing at least one of these tips. On the flip side, if you consistently follow all these tips, your hands will instantly look a lot better. Okay, so now that we know the fundamentals of drawing hands, let's dive into stylization. Here I have a collection of hands drawn in different styles, and we can see how they vary massively in how they look. So I think hand stylization can be broken down into several key factors. First is size. How big is the hand compared to the rest of the body? Second is sharpness and shape. Is the hand more circular, sharp, or square? Is it round or more angular? Third is finger to palm ratio. How long are the fingers compared to the palm? And fourth is detail. Is the hand more detailed or more simplified? Mixing up these elements will allow you to draw hands in different styles. Alright, it's time to apply all that we've learned into some final examples. For our first example, I'm going to style some hands on this character here. I want his hands to be big in proportion to his body, square in shape with rounded edges, balanced palm to finger ratio, and less detailed. To draw them, I'm going to use a combination of the shape method, the mitten method, and the spiral method. I started off with some mitten shapes, and then used the coil method to draw the fingers in perspective, and then use the shape method to build the hand proportionally. I outlined the rough sketch, and here's where things started to fall apart a little. The hand on the left was fine, but the pointing one looked funny, so I readjusted the thumb and finger a bunch of times, but it still looked weird, so I adjusted the other fingers, hated it, went back to my original outline, ended up needing to look into a mirror like this for reference, and then finally realized that the problem was that I had made the ring finger taller than the middle finger. Remembering tips is important. On to the next example. For this one, I wanted the hands somewhat proportional in size, sharp, detailed, and having long fingers compared to the palm. To draw them, I will use the circles and sticks method. I started off with some trapezoids, circles, and sticks to map out this crossed fingers pose, filled out the fingers, realized the angle of the wrist seemed impossibly wrong, ended up looking in the mirror like this, and then adjusting the wrists accordingly. After detailing the character, I outlined the hand and added wrinkles, bones, and nails. Notice how throughout this entire process, I'm doing a ton of readjusting, erasing, and redoing. Hands are some of the hardest things to draw, so don't be afraid to make mistakes and corrections along the way. It can be frustrating when they don't turn out the way you want them to look at first, but don't worry. Take a deep breath and keep pushing through. Let's do one more example. For this one, I wanted proportional, small, round hands that are slightly detailed, and I will use the shape method and the mitten method to draw them. In this example, I wanted to do a quick demo of drawing hands that are holding objects, so this character is going to be holding a pair of daggers. Again, notice how I'm doing a ton of corrections along the way. Learning how to draw hands can take a long time, but the more you practice, the better hands you will draw and the fewer mistakes you'll make. Remember that it helps to know all these methods, strategies, and muscle anatomy, but the only way to really improve is to practice. Art can be a tough and sometimes even aggravating process, but don't give up. Keep on creating, and like any other skill, you will get better at it the more you do it. And there we go. I wish you the best of luck in drawing amazing hands of your own. If you found this video helpful, please consider subscribing to support my channel, and comment down below of what topics you'd like me to cover next. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you again.